What do you mean it's canceled? You have to let us on that flight.
Ma'am, the reservation was deleted 3 days ago.
He wouldn't do that.
My name's Marcus, and I'm a 39-year-old software engineer who apparently graduated with honors from the School of Being Everyone's Personal Bank. I've been married to Jessica for 8 years, though looking back now, I'm not sure if it was a marriage or an extended financial transaction with occasional affection. She's stunning. The kind of woman who looks like she walked out of a romantic movie, with an Instagram feed full of beach photos, yoga poses, and captions about self-care and gratitude. The funny part is that in every post where she calls me her king, I'm basically functioning as her unpaid personal assistant and walking credit card. Then there's her family. Linda, her mother, is a master of passive aggression who could make bless your heart sound like a death threat. She's the type who shows up unannounced, criticizes everything, and somehow makes you feel guilty for existing. Jessica's brother Tyler is 30 years old and still convinced his garage band is about to make it big. They've been on the verge of breaking through for 9 straight years, playing the same dive bars and occasional funeral receptions. My entire marriage can be summarized by one recurring question. Marcus, can you cover this? Jessica's rent before we got married, Linda's emergency dental surgery, Tyler's new guitar equipment, all of it funded by yours truly. I became less of a husband and more of a charity organization that nobody ever thanked. When Jessica walked into my home office one Thursday afternoon with that sweet voice and calculated smile, I should have recognized the warning signs immediately. She leaned against the doorframe like an actress auditioning for a romance film and said she'd been thinking we should take a family vacation. Those words alone should have triggered every alarm in my head. A family trip never means just the two of us. It means her entire dysfunctional clan tagging along on my dime. But I was still optimistic back then, still believing that maybe this time things would be different. She suggested the Bahamas, somewhere peaceful where we could reconnect. Then she casually added that Linda and Tyler could really use a break too. My common sense tried to warn me, but I ignored it and agreed like an idiot. That evening, while Jessica scrolled through Instagram sipping wine, I spent hours hunched over my laptop planning every detail. Flights, hotels, excursions, travel insurance. Everything had to be perfect because if anything went wrong, I'd be the one blamed. Linda still hasn't forgiven me for a rainstorm that ruined her hair during a Miami trip in 2018, as if I control the weather. As I researched luxury resorts, Tyler wandered into the kitchen and asked if he could bring a +1. Turns out his new girlfriend Amber sells crystals online and apparently doesn't believe in paying taxes. I told him fine, but that was the limit. No more additions. Linda appeared out of nowhere like she'd been waiting in the shadows and patted my shoulder, saying I was such a provider that it was in my nature. Not husband, not partner, provider. I stayed up until 1 a.m, comparing flight prices and reading hotel reviews written by people who seemed allergic to happiness. I finally booked a 5-star all-inclusive resort, which in family terms meant a place where we could have buffet arguments and create emotional trauma in a nicer setting. When I hit the confirm button, I actually felt proud of myself. Maybe this trip would smooth things over. Maybe Jessica would finally see how hard I was trying. Spoiler alert, she didn't. The next morning, Jessica looked at the booking details and immediately frowned. She complained that I only got 2 ocean view suites when there were 4 of us. I pointed out that each room fit 2 people, so the math worked perfectly. She said Linda snores and Tyler and Amber would be too loud together. I suggested they could share the other room, and she accused me of being cheap. Cheap. I'd just booked business class flights and a resort that cost more than a decent used car, but sure, I was being cheap. She rolled her eyes and said I was impossible before coffee, then walked away. I grabbed my keys and left for work, wondering how you can give someone everything and still be treated like you're holding out. 2 weeks before the trip, I got a text from Linda inviting me to dinner at her place. The message included a heart emoji, which was the biggest red flag of all because Linda only uses those when she's planning something terrible. Jessica insisted we go, claiming her mom just wanted to discuss trip details. When we arrived, the house looked like an interior design nightmare with fake flowers everywhere and too many throw pillows. Linda greeted us wearing her pearls, the ones she wears when she wants everyone to know she's in charge. Tyler was on the couch with his guitar, and Amber sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by crystals. Dinner started normally enough, which in this family is basically the calm before the storm. Linda asked about my work. Tyler bragged about a meeting with someone he called a producer, but was probably just another SoundCloud follower. And Jessica picked at her salad. Then Linda tapped her wine glass with a fork, the universal signal that someone's about to drop a bomb. She announced they'd made a tiny change to the trip plans. In Linda's vocabulary, tiny means catastrophic. Before I could ask what she meant, Jessica blurted out that she'd invited Brad, her ex-boyfriend. The room went silent. I repeated his name slowly, as in her ex-boyfriend Brad, and she nodded quickly like ripping off a Band-Aid. She explained they'd stayed friends and he'd been going through a rough time, so she thought it would be nice for him to get away. Before I could fully process that absurdity, Linda added that Scott would be joining too. Scott, her ex-husband, the same guy who threw hot coffee at me during Thanksgiving and called it a misunderstanding. Linda said this cheerfully, as if announcing wonderful news. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to acknowledge how insane this was. Tyler avoided eye contact. Jessica looked guilty but defiant, and Amber whispered something about negative energy. I asked if I understood correctly that they wanted to invite Jessica's ex-boyfriend and Linda's ex-husband on a vacation I was paying for. Jessica shrugged and said it was just a trip. I laughed, but not the happy kind, the kind that comes when you realize you're living in a sitcom written by people who hate you. Linda set down her wine glass and smirked, telling me I was overreacting, that we were all adults. I pointed out that last Christmas, Scott tried to sell me fake Bitcoin, while Brad gave me life advice wearing cargo shorts and a Bluetooth headset. Those weren't adults. They were warning signs with wireless connectivity. Jessica's eyes narrowed, and she asked why I always had to make everything dramatic. I said it was my only defense mechanism. Linda crossed her arms and accused me of being selfish, claiming the trip was supposed to bring everyone closer. I stared at her and said the only thing getting closer would be my hand to my forehead when airport security asked why I was traveling with my wife, her mother, her ex-husband, and her ex-boyfriend. Linda sipped her wine and called it progressive. I stood up, tossed my napkin on the table, and told them to enjoy their reunion. Jessica gasped my name. Linda's voice rose, telling me to sit down, but I was done, completely finished. I grabbed my jacket from the hallway and walked out, maintaining an eerie calm that probably scared them more than yelling would have. As I reached the door, Linda hissed that I was ruining family harmony. I turned just enough to tell her this family hadn't been in harmony since Tyler learned guitar, then left. The night air hit me like freedom as I got into my car and sat there for a minute, hands on the steering wheel, just breathing. Then I laughed. One of those deep, tired laughs that sounds halfway between relief and insanity. When I got home, I poured myself a drink and sat in the dark replaying the dinner like a bad movie. I thought about Brad, the guy who once told me emotional cheating wasn't real because feelings don't count. I thought about Scott, whose greatest achievement was surviving 2 marriages while learning nothing. And I realized this wasn't a family trip. It was a test to see how much nonsense I'd tolerate before finally breaking. Around midnight, Jessica came home and stood in the doorway saying I'd made a scene. I didn't look up, just told her she'd invited her ex-boyfriend and her mother's ex-husband to our vacation, so the scene made itself. She insisted it wasn't a big deal, that I was blowing it out of proportion. I asked if I was supposed to be excited about splitting hotel bills with the ghosts of relationships past. She rolled her eyes and stormed upstairs, the bedroom door slamming like punctuation. I stayed downstairs listening to the house settle, holding my drink and thinking about how strange marriage becomes. You start as lovers, become teammates, then turn into coworkers trying to meet impossible deadlines. Around 1 a.m, something shifted inside me. That's when I opened my laptop and started methodically canceling everything. Flight reservations, click confirm, refund pending, villa booking, click confirm, cancellation fee worth it. Dolphin tour, click confirm, sorry marine life. Every cancellation sounded like freedom, little electronic fireworks of liberation. The more I canceled, the lighter I felt. I'd spent 8 years being the guy who never says no, the peacemaker, the wallet. But I was done being the family doormat. When I finished, it was nearly midnight and I sat staring at my spreadsheet of cancellations, smiling. Then I opened the family group chat that Jessica had created, full of months of messages nobody wanted, Linda's recipes, Tyler's memes, Jessica's to-do lists for me. I attached every cancellation email and typed a simple message. Trips off, no refunds, enjoy the silence. I hit send without explanation or apology, just pure digital finality. Then I opened a new browser tab and booked a one-way ticket to Florence, Italy. One seat, window view, non-refundable. I'd always wanted to visit Italy, not with Jessica or Linda or anyone who treated budgets like threats, but for myself. When the confirmation arrived, I grinned like someone who'd just escaped a cult. Next, I called Nathan Chen, my lawyer, who answered on the second ring, sounding confused about the late hour. I told him I'd never been better and wanted to start separation proceedings immediately. He asked if I was sure, and I said I'd never been more certain in my life, explaining that my wife had just invited two of her exes to a vacation I was funding. He chuckled and said he'd prepared the paperwork. I told him I wanted a complete divorce, a clean break with no return ticket. He said we'd keep it organized and professional, then wished me well. After hanging up, I sat watching moonlight bounce off my empty glass, experiencing real quiet for the first time in years, the kind that doesn't need an apology. The next morning, Jessica was up before me, pacing the bedroom, muttering under her breath about how I was being dramatic and always overreacting. When I said good morning, she froze and demanded to know what last night was about. I asked what she meant, playing innocent. She brought up the dinner and how I'd stormed out like a maniac. I corrected her, saying I walked out before committing a felony. She glared at me and said I'd embarrassed her in front of her family. I nodded and said good. Maybe next time they'd invite me to events where I actually belonged. Her nostrils flared, the universal Jessica sign to brace for impact. She snapped that I always twist things, that I can't just cancel plans because I'm angry. I told her I didn't cancel plans because I was mad. I canceled them because I was done. When she asked what that meant, I suggested she check the family group chat. Her eyes narrowed as she scrolled through her phone, and then came the scream I'd been waiting for. She yelled that I'd canceled the trip, canceled everything, even the villa. I confirmed each accusation calmly. She stood there with her jaw open, saying I had no right. I started laughing and told her the only right I'd been left with in this family was the right to pay for things, and I was claiming my emancipation. She crossed her arms, trying to look powerful, but coming off like a kid denied dessert, calling me petty. I smiled and said, no, petty is posting cryptic quotes on Instagram. This was surgical precision. She stomped off to call Linda, which was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Within minutes, my phone lit up like a slot machine with calls and texts. Linda demanding explanations. Tyler asking what happened to snorkeling, all of them losing their minds. I ignored every single message. Instead, I checked my Florence ticket again just to confirm it was real, then walked outside with my coffee and sat on the porch. The morning air felt crisp and peaceful. Even the neighbor's dog seemed to understand this was a don't mess with Marcus kind of day. Around noon, Nathan texted that the paperwork was ready. I told him to email it since I'd be going abroad soon, and he sent a thumbs up. An hour later, the documents arrived in my inbox. Reading them felt strange but final, like closing a browser tab you'd left open for years but never actually needed. Then Patricia sent another text saying I couldn't do this to her daughter, that I'd regret it. I replied that I already regretted marrying into her family, but was moving on to better regrets now. No response came back. By evening, Jessica tried a different approach, showing up in the kitchen with a soft voice and a hurt expression straight from daytime television. She said we needed to talk, and I agreed. She sat across from me saying things had gotten messy, but I didn't need to overreact. There was that word again. Overreact, her favorite accusation. I stood up calmly and told her I wasn't overreacting. I was responding appropriately to years of being treated like a financial appliance. She flinched like I'd struck her with words, and maybe I had. For once, she didn't have a comeback, just whispered that I'd regret this. I said probably, but at least I'd regret it somewhere with better wine. 10 minutes after I'd sent that group chat message, my phone exploded with chaos. Texts from Jessica asking what was happening, Linda demanding explanations, Tyler asking about his snorkeling reservation, and Amber saying Mercury was in retrograde. I didn't answer anyone, just sat there watching notifications stack up while taking the first sip of my beer. Peace had flavor, cold and fizzy, and mildly bitter, just like my mood. Then the calls started, 1 from Jessica, 5 from Linda, 2 from Tyler. I muted them all and turned on Netflix, landing on a nature documentary. The irony of watching lions hunt while my in-laws lost their minds wasn't lost on me. After 20 minutes, curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked at the group chat. The meltdown was in full swing. Linda saying this was unacceptable and I was acting like a child, Jessica begging me to just talk, Tyler complaining about his account going negative, Amber suggesting we all manifest peace, and Linda telling Amber to shut up. I almost choked on my beer. That was the first time Linda and I had ever agreed on anything. Jessica kept texting, alternating between guilt trips and gaslighting, saying I was overreacting. It was just a trip. I was hurting everyone. I set the phone down and said out loud, "Welcome to the No More Marcus Airlines. This flight has permanently departed." Around 10 that evening, Jessica tried FaceTime, which I declined immediately. 10 seconds later, Linda called from her landline because she's one of those people who thinks cell reception lacks spiritual integrity. I answered that one mostly for entertainment. She barked my name before I could say hello, telling me I'd lost my mind. I replied cheerfully, asking how the apocalypse was going. She snapped that this wasn't funny, that we'd had everything planned and now I'd ruined it. I pointed out that I thought the part where she invited her daughter's ex-husband and ex-boyfriend was the actual ruin. She gasped like I'd insulted the Pope, called me cruel, and I said I preferred the term efficient before hanging up mid-sputter. By midnight, the group chat had evolved into a war zone, with Tyler blaming me for overdraft fees, Jessica rallying sympathy, and Linda sending paragraphs that read like political manifestos. I decided to add fuel to the fire with one simple message asking if they'd remembered sunscreen for all that shade they were throwing, then muted the chat again. While they lost their minds, I opened my Florence itinerary and smiled at photos of my hotel room with its balcony overlooking the Arno River. At midnight, Jessica sent one last message saying I was throwing away our marriage over a trip and hoping Italy would keep me warm at night. I replied that they had heated floors and I'd manage just fine. The next morning, I woke to 46 unread messages, 2 missed calls, and a voicemail from Linda that started with "How dare you?" and ended with "The Lord sees you." I deleted it before she could summon divine witnesses. Then came texts from people outside the inner circle, Jessica's friends who'd apparently heard her version already. One said she'd heard about the trip situation. Another sent a grimacing emoji, saying she couldn't believe I'd canceled everything like that. I didn't respond. If they wanted the story, they could get it from Jessica, who was probably already editing her narrative for Instagram captions. Speaking of social media, I made the mistake of checking it. Jessica had posted a picture holding a wine glass with a caption about how sometimes people show you who they really are, and you should believe them, complete with broken heart and healing emojis. I nearly spit out my coffee. This woman was turning our breakup into inspirational content before the cancellation refunds had even processed. Linda commented saying she was proud that God gives his hardest battles to his strongest soldiers. Tyler commented too, calling me wild, but adding LOL. I replied under his comment, pointing out that his landlord was wild for still letting him live rent-free, then watched as he instantly deleted it. A few days later, everything reached peak chaos. Emma, Tyler's girlfriend, sent me a video she'd secretly filmed at the airport. The entire family had shown up expecting their flight to paradise, except there was no flight, no reservation, no confirmation numbers. The video opened with Linda screaming at a gate agent that there must be a mistake, that her son-in-law had booked everything. The agent calmly explained that all bookings under their name had been canceled 3 days prior. Linda slammed her passport down, demanding they reinstate everything, but the agent said that wasn't possible. The camera panned to Jessica, crying into her phone, mascara running everywhere, while Brad stood beside her, wearing aviators indoors, trying to reason with staff because he's in sales. The agent told him unless he was selling her a new computer system, he should step aside. Then Scott appeared, red-faced and loud, asking if they were trying to scam them. The agent explained wearily that their reservations had been canceled by the original cardholder. Scott turned to Jessica, saying she'd told him I wouldn't do anything stupid, and Jessica sniffled that I was supposed to be reliable. The video cut briefly, then resumed with Linda in full meltdown mode, demanding to see a manager. A supervisor appeared with a clipboard and Linda started screaming about their villa and boat reservations and how her son-in-law had ruined everything. The supervisor scrolled through his screen and confirmed everything had been canceled by me. Jessica's expression was priceless, that stunned, wide-eyed look of someone realizing actions have consequences. Scott slammed his fist on the counter, started threatening me, then yelped in pain, shaking his hand. People nearby started filming. One kid asked his mom if this was a reality show. Emma's narration in the background was golden, describing how Linda was yelling at the manager for the third time, while Jessica cried and Brad tried booking last-minute tickets only to have his card declined repeatedly. The final clip showed Linda demanding to use a customer service phone and screaming at an airline representative so loudly that security started approaching. Tyler's voice came through sounding bored, telling his mom to chill because Mercury was in retrograde. Linda spun on him like a vulture, and security escorted them all to a side office. When the video ended, I sat in that Florence cafe, smiling like someone who'd just watched the universe balance its books. Emma texted that they were trending on TikTok under the hashtag Airport Apocalypse, already at 14,000 views. I opened the app and found clips everywhere with captions like, "When your sugar daddy cancels the trip," and "That's what happens when you treat your husband like Expedia with feelings." The comments were brutal but accurate. Someone who worked at airports thanked me personally for the entertainment. I nearly cried laughing. Emma messaged again saying I was a legend, and Dylan was mad but secretly impressed. Then she added something that made me pause, telling me she'd found out Jessica had been texting both exes for weeks, planning to ditch me on the trip to make me jealous and prove a point. She said Brad had bragged about it to Tyler last week, that Scott was in on it too. I stared at that message for a long moment. Not because I was shocked, but because of the casual confidence. I asked if she was sure, and she confirmed 100%. I told her to thank Tyler for the footage, that I owed him a drink. Meanwhile, Nathan was handling everything legally. He called to tell me they'd frozen all joint accounts and filed divorce papers. Turns out Linda had borrowed around $9,000 from my business accounts for what she'd listed as home improvements. But the charges were actually from a spa, fancy restaurants, and something called a glow aesthetics clinic. I laughed and said that was Botox. I'd thought she meant plumbing. Nathan snorted and said that maintenance was officially over, the accounts were frozen, and she'd be getting an unpleasant notification soon. The divorce petition was filed, asset freeze was complete, and both of them would be served within days. By Friday, Jessica would lose access to the joint house, credit cards, and any business funds she'd touched. Around lunchtime, I got confirmation that everything had been filed and accepted. That's when my phone exploded again. Patricia texting asking what I'd done, demanding to know if I thought I could embarrass the family like this, saying her lawyer would be calling. I replied suggesting she might want to hire one first, since they don't accept brunch gift cards as payment. 5 minutes later, Jessica texted shorter and colder, saying I'd gone too far. I stared at it, laughed, and replied that she was confusing too far with finally far enough. Emma became my unofficial intelligence officer, sending me updates about the fallout. She said they'd lost it completely, that Linda had thrown a chair and Tyler was recording everything. I told her to make sure he filmed horizontally for the eventual documentary. She sent a shaky video of Linda shouting about respect, while Jessica screamed at Tyler to turn the phone off, with Tyler laughing in the background saying this was going viral. I watched it twice, chuckling at the poetry of it all. For years, they'd written me off as the quiet pushover. Now I was the headline act in their personal apocalypse. Jessica started a full social media campaign playing the sufferer. Inspirational quotes, black and white selfies, one holding a mug that said, "Rise stronger." You'd think she'd survived a natural disaster instead of a marriage she personally destroyed. Linda backed her up in every comment section, my personal favorite being, "You'll find someone who appreciates your heart. He never deserved you." Not everyone bought the act, though. By week 2, cracks started forming. Someone commented asking if she hadn't invited her exes on his dime. Another added asking if this was the same husband who paid for her mom's Botox. Emma screenshotted those before they got deleted. Then came the podcast interview. Linda convinced Jessica to go on some local show, probably calling it good for her brand. The episode was titled Surviving the Unexpected, One Woman's Story of Heartbreak, and I listened to it while jogging. Jessica's voice came through soft and trembling, talking about how hard it had been, how you think you know someone, but then they change. Change? I hadn't changed. I'd just stopped sponsoring chaos. She said I was so cold at the end that I left without warning. No warning, except maybe the 12 red flags she personally sewed every time she lied about working late. Linda chimed in like a drunk backup singer, claiming her daughter had given everything to me, paid bills, cooked, cleaned. I actually stopped jogging. The last thing Jessica cooked was a Pinterest recipe for how to order takeout in 3 easy steps. A few days later, Emma messaged saying Jessica was losing followers because people were catching on. Someone had leaked the court filings and people were quoting them in her comments. Under one healing post, someone wrote asking if she'd been texting both exes for months, calling it talent, not trauma. Another said if your husband's lawyer has receipts, maybe log off and meditate. Linda tried damage control, but someone replied asking about the wedding vows. By the next week, Jessica's entire online presence shifted to posts about toxic men and accountability culture, but I never responded, not once. And that silence drove her crazy. She tried texting me a few times with long, emotional paragraphs that always started soft and ended sharp, wishing I'd talk to her, saying I was destroying everything we'd built, claiming I was letting the internet turn against her. I didn't reply. Silence had become my new favorite language, and it spoke louder than any argument ever could. Tyler even called once, saying he had no idea it was this bad, that their mom and sister were acting like civilization was ending. I told him that maybe for them it was, but for me it was just Tuesday. He said Amber had told him I seemed happy, and I corrected him, saying peaceful was better than happy. Nathan emailed me the filed documents, beautifully worded and surgical in their precision. Every line was calm and factual. The petition alleged misuse of marital funds and emotional manipulation by respondent and respondent's family. Given the evidence provided, I was seeking dissolution of marriage and restitution of all misused assets. I poured wine, raised it toward my laptop screen, and toasted to legal thunder striking where it's deserved. The next morning, I woke to sunshine and justice. Nathan called saying everything was proceeding smoothly. They were panicking, but the paperwork stood solid. He ended by saying I'd played it calm, and calm always wins. The final settlement came through 6 months later. Not only did I get everything, but Jessica was ordered to pay me $42,000 in restitution for misused funds. Linda's fake boutique scheme collapsed, and she got sued by her own friends. Scott was arrested for unpaid alimony. Brad moved to Idaho, claiming he needed to find himself, which probably meant hiding from creditors and emotional accountability. Tyler surprisingly turned out great, cutting ties with his mom and sister, moving in with Emma full-time, and landing a real gig producing jingles for a radio station. He texted once saying I deserved better, that they'd been using me, and I genuinely appreciated that. I've been in Milan for 8 months now. I took my Florence money and moved to a small apartment overlooking a canal. I work freelance on software projects, make solid money working about 3 hours a day, and spend the rest actually living. There's this cafe near my place run by a woman named Sophia, maybe 30, with black curls and sharp wit. We started as coffee joke friends and evolved into something more. Every morning I show up, and she hands me my drink before I say a word, calling it the Americano with good sarcasm. She tells me stories about her photography work and her grandmother, who once chased a thief with a rolling pin. I tell her edited versions of my past, mentioning I was married once, but it didn't work out because she preferred drama to peace. Sophia grins and says then, I'm allergic to the wrong kind of woman. My life has shrunk in the best possible way. My apartment is small but filled with things that make sense, a record player, plants that actually survive, and a balcony with a postcard view. Sometimes I sit there at night with wine watching couples stroll by, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine stillness. Peace takes getting used to when you've lived in chaos. The first month I'd wake up expecting texts from Linda demanding money or Jessica asking why I hadn't answered her mom's call. But nothing came, just beautiful, nourishing silence. One Sunday, Sophia asked if I ever missed America. I thought about the fast pace, the noise, the constant expectations. I said I missed decent burgers, but not much else. She laughed and asked about the ex-wife. I corrected her automatically. Ex-wife. and said no. I think she's allergic to happiness. Sophia smirked, saying then we had that in common. We started spending more time together, coffee turning into lunches, lunches into evening walks. She'd show me her favorite photography spots, narrow alleys with sunbeams slicing through, bridges where city lights looked like melted gold on water. One night she snapped my picture without warning. I asked what it was for, and she said for proof that I looked peaceful now. I guess I did. One morning an envelope appeared under my door, handwritten with no return address. I recognized Jessica's careful, rounded letters immediately. I made coffee before opening it, partly for courage, partly from habit. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 lines. You were right. I'm sorry, it was never about the trip. I read it twice, once expecting hidden daggers, again realizing the dagger had already landed years ago. I didn't feel triumph or even anger, just closure, the quiet kind that doesn't need to be posted online. I walked to my desk, pulled open the drawer where I kept old receipts and tax papers, and tucked the letter inside. Not to save it or cherish it, just to store it like evidence of something that once happened. That afternoon I met Sophia by the canal. The sun was warm, the air smelled like baked bread, and people were genuinely laughing. We sat on a bench sharing a sandwich, and she looked at me, saying I seemed lighter that day. I smiled and told her I'd canceled some baggage. She laughed, saying I always made pain sound like a punchline. I said, maybe that's my superpower, turning trauma into entertainment. But she suggested maybe it was just the sound of healing. We sat there watching the world move, kids chasing pigeons, a street musician playing something soulful, water reflecting everything it touched. I thought about that letter, how small it was compared to everything it had cost. 8 years of carrying someone else's storms, all reduced to 3 sentences. I didn't hate Jessica anymore because hatred requires energy I'd rather spend learning to be happy without permission. Her apology wasn't redemption, it was acknowledgement, a quiet, overdue whisper into the void. When we finished lunch, Sophia stood brushing crumbs from her jeans and said, I didn't talk like someone who'd lost something. I told her that's because I hadn't. I just stopped mistaking weight for worth. She grinned, saying I should write a book, and I suggested the working title, How to Divorce Drama and Find Coffee Nirvana. That night, back in my apartment, I took one last look at that drawer with the letter tucked between old receipts, then closed it gently. I poured wine and leaned on my balcony as Milan glowed beneath me. Peace didn't look like revenge. It looked like this: one man, one quiet evening, and nobody left to impress. My name is Marcus. I refused their trip, canceled everything, and booked my own. I'm not running away anymore. I'm finally flying first class in my own peace. Sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to unplug it completely and walk away. 8 years of being everyone's backup plan taught me that my worth isn't measured by what I provide, but by the peace I protect. Best decision I ever made, and I've never looked back.